Hello, everybody. Hope you had a good weekend. I'm ready to jump into the material here. There's quite a bit to cover. 8 weeks goes quickly, but with HTML and CSS, most people seem to pick up on it fairly quickly. Multiple languages that we're mixing. That takes a little people off guard at first. They do that to kind of optimize what we get from each language. We use the strengths from each language, and then we only have good points from that different language, and just optimize what's going on by using the best points from several different things. HTML and CSS in this class. JavaScript is also part of the standard. Server-side scripting is most often handled with PHP. We're going to take a look at the official reference page today, and you'll see it has PHP reference as well. So we kind of mix and match our languages, which takes people off guard. But one thing you don't want to get confused on is they're not isolated things. Technically, any manner we have to give instructions to a computer, we can give that computer any instruction it could run. It's just very, very unfeasible at times. For example, when we get near the end of the semester, I'll show you all how to do math with HTML, which is very tedious and takes a lot of extra work, and you will certainly never do unless you need to show somebody that it is actually possible. Like if you're teaching a class on HTML or something. But it's not something that we would normally do, so we skip those hard to do parts and only use the not so bad parts that are really good for the machine, and then mix our languages. Similar thing with CSS, we can use the style sheets, which we haven't really even looked at those at all yet, to change words on the page just as easily as we change colors. And only a couple of words. If it starts to get even to be a long sentences, it gets a little bit tricky with CSS. But again, we'll take a look at that later in the semester after we've seen quite a few things. I got a few things to talk about today, and here in a couple weeks, or well, really for the whole class, there's a semester-long project. The proposal for what you'd like to make, obviously by the nature of this class, is going to be a big static website, an informative website where you're just put together a bunch of pages to provide information to people about something. So maybe start thinking about what topics you would like to do for that. Otherwise, I guess we can go ahead and jump into the lecture unless anybody had some questions. Okay, I assume the silence means no questions. So one point that I always like to express in class, as we get started in the first example here, is well, in a classroom, we're under very tight time constraints. So pretty much anything that can fit in the time constraints of a classroom, including the entire length of the course, the 8 weeks here, could probably be done without a plan. But this is a learning environment, and if we turn that around, that anything that fits in our time constraints can be done without a plan, we also say that anything that fits in our time constraints is really easy to make a plan for. So anything in the classroom is really easy to make a plan for, so it's a good place to learn and get a little bit of practice making plans before you actually need to make a plan. You don't want to learn how to when you actually need to plan. So you can get a little bit of practice at that now. And then when you, at some point in the future, when you need to get things organized for, say, 10 or 12 developers to spend 3.5 months on a project, something really big where you would need a plan to keep it all aligned, you'll know how to make a plan. And practicing that's really easy now. So I'm going to start with a note about that. Make a plan. Yeah, I'll just for what I just said here. Should be easy in a classroom. That's not how it's called, classroom. I'll put time constraints. When we're learning in a classroom situation, obviously we can only do things that are so big. Otherwise, we would very quickly run out of time for them. For websites, can't seem to spell today. For websites in particular, there's a few parts we usually do for a plan. Some sort of proposal to let people know what it's going to be. And those proposals usually include timelines and storyboards and wireframes. Proposal, wireframe, or a storyboard. And the ones I'm going to do here in the class, the way I like to do wireframes and storyboards, I kind of combine them. So we're going to talk about those very, very soon. Let me add her to the list. There we go. There'll be some other things, just telling the client what they're going to get from the web page and the basic idea of what it's going to look like. That's what the wireframe and storyboard are. And the last two parts on making a plan, I always like to emphasize this. This is really the point I like to emphasize about in the classroom. And that's going to be the timeline and the budget. Because in a classroom, those two things are as trivial as can be. The timeline is the due date, or at the longest, the end of the semester. And the budget in a classroom is going to be zero. But when you get out in the real world and are making websites for clients, the only two lines they care about, right? How much does it cost? And when do they get it? There's going to be a big, huge proposal, probably several pages long, writing out all kinds of details, showing pictures of what they're going to get and when they can, what they can expect it to do once they get the product. But really, it boils down to they're only going to care about these two lines. But in a classroom, those two lines are pretty much as trivial of things as can be. Oh, hi Dakota. We were just starting off here, making some points about plans. I always like to express this. Anything that can happen in the classroom, I find this very important, so I like to reiterate it. Anything that can fit in the time constraints of the classroom could be done without a plan. Everything has to be small enough to fit. If we turn that around, anything that fits in the time constraints of a classroom means making a plan for it is going to be really, really easy. So this is a place to learn to make a plan. That way, when you actually need a plan, you have some practice with it. Bunch of different parts. We're going to look at wireframes and storyboards here in just a moment. These two lines up. How much does it cost and when do they get it? In a classroom, that's always going to be $0 and the due date. So as trivial as can be. I'll write that in all capital letters. Trivial in a classroom. But look, the most important part in the real world. After you graduate and you're making websites for people, that's the only things they care about. Like, yeah, this 6-page proposal with pictures and long-winded descriptions is nice, but when do we get it? So it's very, very important. And getting accurate at predicting these things takes practice. So the main point of all this is these are things you want to practice in the classroom. Make up some numbers. We're under tight time constraints. The schedule is kind of out of our hands, right? The longest is March 15th. 11:59 p.m. March 15th. But you can make up some numbers for how long you think it's going to take you to do something, and then make up some numbers for how much you think you would the client should be charged for doing that. And then after you finish that, like on all your homework assignments, the project and everything, come back and double check those and see how close your original estimates were. Well, at the very beginning, those are going to be guesses. They're not even estimates. But after taking a couple guesses at that and refining it and getting better and better at it, you'll be able to make some pretty reasonable estimates about how long something's going to take and how much you would charge a client for it. And then after you graduate and get out in the real world, you'll be really good at predicting how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost. And that will make your clients and managers very, very happy and assure a steady flow of work. So planning stuff is trivial in a classroom, but that also makes it easy in a classroom. So it's a good place to get good practice at it. So that way you're good at those skills, especially predicting those two things right there, because that's going to make a big difference when you're actually doing this stuff. So that being said, let's kind of look at what is involved with making a plan. There's a semester-long project that I think in week 3, or sorry, not week 3, module 3, y'all will write a proposal for. And what I always ask for in classrooms is just go online and find a template for a project proposal template and fill that out. Those are great learning tools. I'm not particularly a fan of templates as far as like real business situations, but I love templates in a classroom because that document tells you what to write and where to write it at. So it's a great learning tool. But the project plan is basically going to have a few key points. We'll kind of start one out here. I'll try to do them periodically in class examples just to remind you about this point. But it's something, just a suggestion to practice yourself. Something that will be very, very useful for you. So class example site for today. Oh wait, this is day 2. Class example page. And we'll combine pages into several pages into sites very, very soon. Probably Wednesday, actually. We'll take our first look at that. So what is our goal? The goal for this web page, and I might as well write site. Seems odd to write page there. It'll be a 1-page site. That works. The goal is demonstrate HTML tag usage to put words on a page. Not too fancy of a goal, but that's the biggest part of the plan, is just making sure it is very clear and explicit what you're trying to do. And can help with getting things together. Some other parts, you write long descriptions when you make plans, and it's good to practice it. But again, the 2 big ones to practice in a classroom, because they're as trivial as can be here, are the timeline and the budget. Timeline and budget. And as you're doing your homework in different practice for this class, just make some numbers up for that. And with each subsequent thing you do, try to improve those numbers so you get really good at guessing. Our timeline here is, let's say 45 minutes. I tend to ramble a little. And our budget, I'm just gonna go ahead and write down the classroom win of 0. But make up a number that you would charge a client for what you're about to do. The other big part is websites are very much a graphical thing. So you want to give people some indication of what it's going to look like. We do that with wireframes and storyboards. Wireframe and storyboards. They're very, very similar. I can't seem to spell words correctly this afternoon. Storyboard. A wireframe is a very, very stripped down version. There won't be any words on a wireframe, basically. So a wireframe would look something like the big box up top for the header, then some little lines to indicate the pages, and this big box down here to indicate an image, and that's a wireframe. The most stripped down version of it, where if you were just late at night, you're falling asleep, and you step way back from the computer screen and let your eyes go out of focus, the basic shapes that you would see on a page. It's very important for analyzing white space. We'll talk about the importance of white space here before too long with some of our lectures. But that's the idea of a wireframe. And a storyboard has a few more details, often colors in it, but I didn't bring any colored markers today. I'll have art with black markers. I forgot I was going to draw some colored stuff with colors, but it would have some sections. So up at the top here, it's like a header section. I'll kind of divide this off. Side section, maybe that's for navigation. Paragraphs. And down here, a picture, or if you can, maybe instead of the word picture, maybe if it's going to be a person, just a rough idea of it's going to be somebody's profile picture, I'll throw a stick man in there. Or it's going to be a landscape picture, draw a very rough landscape. So you see it has a little bit more details, but things might often overlap in the storyboard, so you don't get quite as good of idea of what the white space is going to look like, how things are spread out on the page. So typically what I'll do for our class examples here is I'll combine these two, which that's just a personal thing. I'll make a note of that. I like to combine these two things. So it's kind of like a wireframe where there's still a lot of the white space indicated, but add in the words from the storyboard so that it's not just black boxes and lines on the page. So up here, maybe a header section. Okay, this is today's lecture. Instead of a profile picture, I'm going to do some generic scenery thing. I don't know, maybe some mountains, whatever in the background, sunshine, some trees. Then page content. To just kind of label out what this is indicating, all those separate paragraphs just marked with the basic white space, and then the landscape image. Just a rough idea of what the page is going to look like. And I forgot I was going to draw that and only grab black markers, but obviously that's a good spot to throw in some colors as well, because it would be part of the proposal that you're going to give to the client. Like, this is what I was thinking. Make your website look like this, basic idea of it, spread it out, and should be done by this date, and it's going to cost this much. And especially on those last two lines, if you're accurate with what you tell them, when to expect it and how much to write the check for, they're going to be very, very happy. Let everybody they know that you're good at delivering things on time and on budget, and that will assure a steady flow of work. So it takes a little bit of practice, but not much, because we're under tight time constraints. So anything we do in the classroom here, it's going to be really easy to jot down a rough plan for and get an idea for. And obviously, we can carry that out with a few more details. Start breaking it down into schedules. Like, instead of saying 45 minutes here, schedule something like, how long have I talked here now? 10 minutes. So like 10 minutes for planning. 25 minutes coding. 5 minutes finding picture. What is that? That's 30, 40 minutes, so 5 minutes left. 5 minutes debugging. Right, it's not the official plan yet. It's just practice at making a plan. So it can be rough notes and rough ideas. And as you practice that, you'll get better and better and better at it. So that the times you really need a plan, like when there's 15 website developers working on a project that's going to take 3.5 months, you'll know how a plan goes together and be able to reasonably put those things together. Because now we can kind of jump into an example. Just an idea on planning, and I'll kind of bring that back around a couple times through the semester, remind you about it, but just something that's a good idea. Oh, and for your final project, I will want all that stuff. A descriptive goal of it, a timeline broken down into a schedule, put something on the budget line, even though we're in a classroom and the budget's going to be 0. So, well, it'll be due once, but it's a good idea to practice it quite often, and it doesn't take up much time. Oh, there's somebody. I'll add him to the list here. So as we get into our first example here, basically making the wireframe that's on the board. So I'm going to leave that up there for a moment and go ahead and share my screen and just start putting things together, and I will periodically point at like the wireframe stuff here on the board to show how these are like. The first thing we saw the other day, we're going to start with the HTML tags. And, well, we might not get to color today at all. I want to make sure there's plenty of time to practice this stuff after we finish talking about it. It's fantastic. So, what we talked about last week, HTML and the CSS, we're just writing our instructions for how this stuff should look and what words should be there, and where it should be positioned. We do all of that with simple Unicode text. That's what the browser is expecting. So it needs some sort of text editor. I'm just going to use Atom for this class for the most part. There's lots of different options. And really, if you're just getting started into learning about IT stuff, computers, especially those who are heading down the software development path, you will want to try lots of different text editors, find the ones you like. Get some stuff out of the way here. So first thing, I'm going to go ahead and save this as an HTML file. I have predictive text turned off because that would get in the way of classroom examples, but predictive text is very, very useful, and the computer or text editor can't really predict what you're trying to type unless it knows at least what language you're typing in. And we saw this the other day. I'll just hit Control S to save it. And it's just a text file. We can call it whatever we want. I'll call this class example. And well, that has the Unicode. If we sent that to the browser would know what to do with it. But the point I just mentioned, the predictive text and the things changing colors in the text editor, or recognizing it by the icon, all of that are because we want the computer to know that we put HTML code in this file. And that's what the extension's for. The extensions are completely arbitrary, but it lets the computer know what is in that file. So we can just give it the extension .html. So now the computer will kind of change colors appropriately for HTML, and if you still have your predictive text turned on, it'll try to make predictions on things. But the very first line, what I'm going to put in every example in class, or try to remember to put it in every example in class, we could technically leave off right now, because the first line says what type of document it is, what the code is about. And right now, everything for a website is in HTML5. Should be 5.2 right now, but 5.1, 5.0 still work, as do for all of the versions of 4 and all the versions of 3, 2, 1. Backward compatibility is very important. So really, this first tag goes with backward compatibility. So we could leave it off when we're working in the current standard, but at some point in the future, we move on to HTML6 eventually. That's something that we know is going to happen, because we're already up to version 5. Versions steadily increase over time. So eventually there's going to be a new one, and in that case, we have to come back and put the opening tag, the document type declaration in every single file it was left off of, or they will stop working. And it always looks like this. An exclamation mark. What's a tag? So we need angle brackets. All of our tags always have angle brackets. An exclamation mark, and then the doc type. And then doc type is HTML. And back when it was like HTML4, it was always a link to a website that went there. It was a URL to the HTML4 standards, where those were found at, so the computer would know what to do with it. And other information on that page, because before HTML5, the browsers didn't have to comply to the HTML standards. So we had to do different things for different browsers, which is going to be a big point when we see comments in HTML. But it's a good idea to type that in. It's much, much easier to just type that little tag every time instead of creating a new one. And then we do our regular HTML. We'll have an opening HTML tag, and I'll just come down a couple lines and put a closing HTML tag. And that's the advantage of markup languages, especially the tag-based markup languages. Every piece of data we send to the computer explicitly states where that data starts and where that data stops, as well as the data itself. Everything that goes in between them is HTML data and metadata. I'll go ahead and put one in. Language equals EN. Some metadata saying that also this web page is typed in English, so that if somebody is on their browser and their version of Google Chrome knows that they speak Spanish, they can go ahead and look for the Spanish version of the web page instead of the English version of the web page. And notice the prediction stuff came up there. Oh, well, that wasn't a predictive thing. That was saying something's missing in the predictive text and needs spelled out. But descriptions and things like that will come up. And that's called an attribute. That's our technical term for it. Attributes go in the opening tag, and it's essentially data about the data enclosed in that tag. So again, with that point, I was just making every piece of data includes its start point, its stop point, and its own metadata. So it's a really, really, really great form to send to a CPU. A little bit extra typing for the human. So I put those angle brackets everywhere and spell this stuff out in written text essentially. But that little bit extra work makes it faster on the machine side, which is what the end user is going to want. There's more than one way to specify the language. I think our textbook used that one. If not, I'll double check before the next class. But I think our textbook uses the LANG thing. Then we'll come down a couple lines, and I'm going to do some indenting. The white space is only for our benefit. Well, when we go to run this page, I'll pull it up in the elements, and you'll see that the computer gets rid of some white space before it actually runs it. But the white space makes it easy to run, easy to read. So we'll come down, we'll leave a little bit of space, and then put the two tags that we'll need everywhere. There's a head tag, and then we'll need a body tag. Those are part of the standard. We need to include those everywhere. And for the most part, the difference between them is what is on the body will show on the page. Only a couple of things that we put in the head tag will actually show on the page. So I like to reference it like a person, the analogy of a person. The head is referring to the internal, the thinking part, what does not get seen, and the body is referring to that outer edge of what we can actually see. Stuff on the body shows on the page, and the head is usually information about what goes on the page. I'm going to come down here at the body tag, and to start with, I'm going to type stuff without any tags. Here are some words on the page. We're going to save that. Inside the body tag, let the tags on. Didn't put any tags on that particular piece of data, just the text that I actually want to show on the page. Now, if we navigate to where that's at, if I saved it in the right place. Oh, yeah. Oh, and I can get rid of those. You can see the .html tag tells the computer that if somebody double clicks on this, open it with the default browser. Everybody's probably encountered that at some point in our modern world. But if we open it up, we got the those words showing up on a page. That's what we were looking for. So we can come back and add some more stuff. I'll put another paragraph down here. Save it. So more just text on a page without anything to really identify those two paragraphs distinctly or separate from each other. When I reload it, you can kind of see there's a bit of a problem. Those were supposed to be separate paragraphs. The computer just wrote the text for put them together one right after the other. So there's not a whole lot of formatting options. And that's where we need our tags at. They uniquely identify each piece of data. In this case, the two pieces of data on the page are those paragraphs. So on a way to uniquely identify each one so the computer knows not to just run them together, to keep them separate. And HTML is all about text and graphics. So obviously paragraph is one of our most basic tags. So it's been around since the creation of HTML. And back then we abbreviated everything. So paragraph is just a P. And then at the end of that paragraph, make sure and put in angle brackets for a tag, a slash, and then a P to end that paragraph. Actually, I like show mistakes. I'm going to leave this one off. It's kind of a small one to say forgot stuff because it all fits on one page, but maybe we forgot to put that closing tag in so we can see what happens whenever those go on there. So I reload the page now. It looks okay, kind of blended together. As we move further along, though, there would be more problems arise. So I just opened up the inspector here in the browser. All of our browsers have this. You can pretty much always right-click or whatever is appropriate for the system you're on, long click, or I'll say right-click and choose inspect from the option, or it is pretty much always the F12 button on your on the function row keys. The F12 function key to open the inspector on pretty much every browser. So I expand the body tag and notice the hovering. So hover over the body, it highlights both paragraphs, like opposed to Google Chrome's getting better about putting in closing tags. So it noticed that one was missing and put it in there. So fine here, but we can't really count on Google Chrome putting in those missing tags where they're supposed to be. If it notices the missing tag, it'll try to put it in. Be like, nope, there has to be a closing tag here. But it might not really know where they go. And if it can't figure out a good spot to put it, it'll put it down at the very bottom, which probably isn't where it goes. So you don't really want to rely on it. On this example, it doesn't make much difference. And then another thing I wanted to point out is notice that all that white space that I put in there was taken out. And actually, this would automatically indent. So if I had everything over at the left, it would automatically indent when we see it here. So the white space is only for our benefit in the background to help keep things straight. These thumbnails are just all kinds of in the way. Go back over to the text editor. But that's the basic idea. And like I was just saying, while the browser will put some tags in there, you don't want to rely on the browser. the browser is not intelligent. There's a good chance if it throws in a missing closing tag, it's going to throw it in the wrong spot. So just quick notes about the tags that we're putting in, and when we get to CSS, perhaps take a first glance at it today, but that'll probably be Wednesday. It becomes even more important to be able to easily identify each paragraph. Maybe we don't want those written with the same color of text, or the same font, or same size, or one of them at the left side of the page and one of them at the right side of the page, or one at the top and one at the bottom. A lot of different ways we might want to distinguish between them. So the tags are the first step in uniquely identifying all the data on the page. Because we'll need that in order to control what it looks like, really. That's our big concern. Okay, stop share. So I'm going to go back to the plan, put on the board. So this is the page we want to make. Here's what our wireframe looks like. I have some sort of big label up at the top. Looks like I drew out 3 paragraphs and then an image down below it. So we want to kind of put that together. And again, wireframes and storyboards are the main ways to draw that out. Draw.io, for those who have seen it before, has a lot of templates ready to go for both of them. And we will look at those at some point. It's a nice, easy place to get nice things together. I like to combine the two and put storyboard information in something that looks more like wireframe. The wireframe gives us a good idea of the white space and the general layout. I guess you can add colors in there. I like to think of the wireframe as when it's late at night, you can barely look at the screen anyway. You step a few feet back, let your eyes go out of focus. The shapes that you see on the page is the wireframe. And then the storyboard is kind of spelled out or diagrammed with some of the details, but maybe not the white space. So I usually just go ahead and put the two together. It makes a nice diagram for planning. So we need some sort of header up at the top. And we have tags to do that. We have different levels of headers. Pretty good for text is coming back up. I tried to turn it off, but sometimes it shows back up. So H1 headers are the biggest ones. So if I tab, once the predictive text is there, you see it gives the opening and closing tags. Now I just need the data to go in between it. Maybe a class example. Number 1. I was skip counting the one last week because that was more of a preview than an example. So that should make it show a lot. As you would suspect, the level 1 header is going to be a lot bigger than the paragraph text. And there's 6 levels, so they get smaller and slightly different by the default settings. Obviously, we can change those any way we want. So make it H2. And notice how now the text editor is kind of indicating there's an error. So okay, you opened the H1 tag, or you opened an H2 tag, we closed an H1 tag. There we go. So save that. You'll see it. It's a little bit smaller. Still definitely bigger and bold. It's really hard to tell here. If I open the inspector back up, you'll probably see it. The padding and margins are a little bit different. They don't seem much different in this page, but we have a little bit extra space around the header levels, the paragraphs as well. But again, we will have full control over that very, very soon. I'll jump ahead a couple more layers. So like H4, I'll skip over H3. And y'all can change those numbers one through 6 to see what different ones look like. By the time we get on to 4, it looks like it's about the same size as the paragraph, just bold. And H6 our lowest level of header is smaller than the text, but it's at least still bold. You can tell it's not the same type of text, but the default settings. And those are just useful names to have on there. I'm gonna go back to like what the picture has and go back to just the level 1 header. I'll go back to the picture I drew on the board. There's that big header up top, a couple paragraphs, and whoops, here. I guess I'll put another paragraph in here. Another paragraph. And personally, to avoid forgetting to close tags, what I found over the years, instead of going all the way across the sentence, starting at the beginning, typing the data, and closing the tag, I always like to do that. The open and close tags together, and then come back and put the information between. One more paragraph to match the picture on the board. This one needs to be long enough to wrap around. Probably sentences here. That might be enough. So a whole bunch of words in that one. Excuse me. A bunch of words. So hopefully we'll see a line break there. Nope, that's still not enough. That might be enough. Nope, not quite to the next line yet. And so a few more words. This just pretty sized. Browser though. Oh, a few more words. Hopefully, I wrap around to the next line now. Save it, come over and reload the page. Remember to save it before you reload the page, because what the text editor shows is the temporary working version. And what the browser loads is the saved version from the hard drive. The text editor shows the version in memory, and the browser grabs the version from storage. And if you don't hit save, they're not going to be the same thing. Just to show that you, by default, you can see the difference between lines of text, between paragraphs and within a paragraph. If I adjust the size a little, you see it stays very similar to what it was trying to do. I'll adjust size differently. We'll talk about this button that I just hit here. I think next Wednesday, not 2 days from now, but 3 class periods from now, we'll see this and the different phone emulators. So get an idea of what it would look like on an iPhone or on a Galaxy, and see what this stuff looks like on different sites with the default settings. We'll see that button very, very soon. It will actually be a very important part of your homework very, very soon. I think next week, might be the week after. So that's kind of like that. One thing, part of the reason I wanted that big long text is notice the text editor is not wrapping the text like you might be used to from Google Doc or something. It just kept going and going and going, which kind of makes it hard to edit. So I have to scroll way back and forth. So whatever text editor you selected, make sure you do know how to toggle word wrap on and off, because if you do word wrap and then all those words fit on the page, it's a whole lot easier to edit. Usually under the view tab, in Atom, they called it soft wrap, but some sort of word wrapping feature so that everything fits in the window that you're looking at. Can make a big difference to edit, but to edit the small details like typos in those paragraphs. So for the big overall picture of encoding our data into HTML, it's often better to work without the word wrap on, so that you get the big picture of where the different things are and how they're laid out. And picture, that's the other thing we need. So just like on the board, the little plan beforehand, need some sort of picture. So I'm gonna go just grab something off the internet. Winter picture. So outside today, it's just cold. It'd be nice if there was like some snow. So much easier to deal with the cold when there's snow and it looks like it should be winter. That looks like a good one. So I'll just save this. How's it saving it to Google Drive? That's weird. One thing though is whenever you load that in, you're either going to want it in the same folder as the web page, or you'll want to type in the address. And we're going to spend a few minutes talking about typing in addresses and see different ways to do that next Monday. So for now, make sure any images or anything you need is in the same folder. Or in the long run, when you get away with it, it does make it a lot easier to just keep everything in the same folder. I'll call this landscape, and note that it's a JPEG image. What is this? And so another one of our most basic tags is, along with the text, we want to show graphics. So the most basic way to show graphics is the image tag, which again goes back to the beginning of HTML, back in the days when everything was abbreviated, so it's not spelled out. And the image tag does need a few attributes. First off, we need to tell it what image we're going to show. And the image is another file. So it needs to leave this file, go somewhere else, grab that other file, and bring back the image. And there's two ways that we do that. We can either do a source or hyperlink reference. And basically, the difference between them is how much of that file do we need. A source, if we source the file, if we source the outside data, we get all of it every time in the same order. So if we need the whole thing every single time, then we want to use the source attribute. And again, attributes are the extra little bits of data we put in the opening tag to indicate that stuff. The word metadata, most people are familiar with that, but I don't want to use that every time about the opening tag stuff, because there is something explicitly called metadata that we will put on our pages before long. The other one is a hyperlink reference. We can reference another source of data and pick and choose pieces from it. Or we don't need the whole thing and we can change the order up. But for an image, we usually want that whole image. Otherwise, it's not going to show right. It'll probably look like an error happened if we don't get the whole image in the same order every time. So that's a source attribute, abbreviated SRC. So I'm going to source that image, and then we need the name of it. Landscape.jpg. There's a couple other things. So one thing that is a little different with our image tag, it will not throw errors without this, but on all this other stuff, we have an opening tag. I'll go to one that I can highlight here. We have an opening tag. And we have the data represented by that tag nested inside of between the opening and closing tag. So our data is nested in between those two tags to make the full element. An image is a little bit different though, right? Because we already loaded everything about that image into the opening tag. And those are called attributes. And so we'll never have anything to nest between the opening and closing tags. So, and that's when we have standalone tags. Oops. Didn't realize that was highlighted. And I'm going to put a backslash here. So that little close-like symbol that we've been putting on closing tags, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the opening one. And again, it's like that line way up at the top. We don't actually need that in HTML5. The thing about this, and the reason I'm going to put it in here, and I would like to see it in your code, have that little slash there, is every time they have tried to do a new standard, all the big changes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and all the little changes, 5.0, 5.1, 5.2, every time the standard is changed, they've tried to make that requirement of that slash and a standalone tag part of the requirements. But there's some backward compatibility issues, and browsers have a lot of trouble with really old web pages that wouldn't have that. So the companies that make the browser try to get some adjustments in, and that they haven't been able to get it working quite right yet. So it wouldn't be backward compatible. So every time the standard's released, they have to drop that thing they want to do at the last minute. But eventually they're going to be able to include that in the standard. So it's good practice to put it here now. And all our other markup languages, the ones we still use that weren't developed back in the 1990s, came along after decisions to include things like that. Or decisions were made that things like that should be included. So most of our other markup languages will have that slash. So again, it's really good practice to put it there if we have a standalone tag. It will not throw an error if you do a closing tag on it. But the img tag will never nest any data inside of our picture. And we sourced the data instead of referenced the data, which means we get all of it every time. So there's nothing that we would need to nest in between tags. So those are usually opening tags. There's a more modern one called picture, which does have opening and closing tags. And usually we nest multiple sources in there. So we have images in different sizes and different qualities and different things that we can choose between depending on the machine that's being shown on. But to start, we'll see that in a few weeks. But to start with, just the image tag, source, and then the name of the file. And you need the address to it if it's not in the same folder. That's on the schedule for next week to talk at length about addresses and URLs and locations of things. We also got a picture in there. We can add some attributes in for the width and height of a picture. That's apparently the size it was. If we don't explicitly state anything different, it will stick with the default size. Before I add those in there, notice something here. I can get to the attribute way up here. I guess I need to take out some white space. Make things fit. Oh, too much white space. Makes it easier to read, but things I was hoping would show up on the thing together. There we go. And if you're not familiar with it, the home and end keys can be very, very useful. I like to show keyboard shortcuts on the way through class. They're very, very useful. Home and end, which are on different spots on just about every keyboard. Those are very, very useful to jump to the beginning and end of a line. So push the end key, it jumps all the way to the end, obviously. Then we hit home. Notice that it went to where it was indented over to. Home went to the beginning of the indenting. If I hit home again, it'll jump back to the beginning of the line. And if I keep hitting home, it'll just toggle between those two. But a very, very useful thing. And most of y'all are probably way too young to remember this, but it's way before your day. Before we had a mouse to drag around and click things, the way we would highlight stuff is by holding down the shift key and using the arrows. So if you want to highlight like an entire line, I'll go up here. What I like to do is just click somewhere in it, hit the end key, hold down shift and push the home key, and then you have the whole line highlighted in just a couple key presses. I like to show keyboard shortcuts because there are lots and lots of them. And the mouse is really, really slow. Or if you look at a mouse, we usually have, 2 to 6 buttons on a mouse, where there's usually at least 80 on a keyboard, 80 to 120 buttons on a keyboard. So obviously we have a lot more control with the buttons, but it takes a minute to learn all the things they do. Before the little keyboard thing there, just keep those keys in mind. They're very, very useful to navigate around the home and end. Notice here in our opening tag, we had an attribute defining what language our HTML was in. And there's the name of the attribute we're assigning a value to. Okay, there's a language, we're gonna say it's English. And this one was built into the language, HTML language. So if you have your predictor text turned on, you probably would have seen that when you hit L in the HTML tag, it would have predicted that you wanted to type the word lang there. And then it's equal to a string. Or if you hasn't seen that before, string is the standard term for written language in computers programming, and we define that by wrapping set of text inside of quotation marks. So the name of the attribute is equal to some string. And spaces here don't matter, we can put spaces. A lot of people like to leave spaces off on the attributes because they are also space limited. Notice how the name of the tag is separated from the attribute by a space. So leaving the spaces off on what the attribute is assigned, a lot of people just find that easier to read. It helps us to focus in quicker without having to actually read and figure out which spaces are delimiting and which ones are just extra white space. did this. And attributes will always be that. The name is equal or assigned some string. And space delimiter. So that picture looked awful small on the page. So we also have width and height attributes. Did that? Yeah, so you can see width. I turned the predictive text off, but we're getting information about it. The width attribute local to image tags. If I click more, it links right to some reference material online. This is a good one. This is the one Mozilla put together. After our break here in about 5 minutes, I was going to look at the official page, and then probably next week, after we've had a little bit of practice with CSS, I was going to look at the best one. I want you to get a little bit of practice with CSS before we go to the best reference material. So, oh, no. So, let me do that again. So here with the predictive text, where's that acting weird? So I start typing with, and when it shows up in that box, I can hit tab to select that. And it already put the quote marks there for the string and put the cursor in between the quote marks. So that point I said earlier about the tags, do the opening and closing tags and then come back in between them so it doesn't get missed. That's not just me, that's very, very common. So common that that's what programmers had their predictive text do. Do the beginning and end if those are necessary, and then come inside of them. You're probably used to English where we type left to right, top to bottom. That's not the most productive way to write computer code. It actually works better if the computer needs it in a certain order, left to right, top to bottom, by the time it runs. But that order very rarely aligns with the way we think. So it works a lot better to do some jumping around. You can see from what the predictive text did there, I'm not the only one that does that. It's common enough that that's what predictive text does. So now we did a width, which is going to be in pixels. So let's say, I don't know, 765 pixels wide. Then a height. Again, it predicted it of, I don't know, 456 pixels. The only units we can get here are pixels. When we get to CSS, there's so many more units to work with. I'll spend an entire day going over units and we won't even see all of them. We have when we get to CSS, we have basically every unit of measurement humans have ever come up with for measuring text. We made it a little bit bigger. Kind of hard to tell on a wintry landscape, but things do get blurry when we stretch them out. We can shrink them down without losing much quality. A finite number of times. Every time we shrink them down, we do lose some quality. But usually when we stretch them out, they get blurry, but that doesn't really show at all on the wintry landscape. So hopefully you're kind of seeing some patterns there. Computer programming and coding. Notice that I keep using those words separately. Here, this is more of a coding thing, or encoding. We're encoding our data into HTML format so that the computer knows what to do with it. Whereas programming is usually more instruction-based things, like determine which key was pressed and then do something, do one of 10 different things based off what key the user pressed. That's usually what we think of with programming, but both of them go together because the computer will need the data involved in that program to be put together in some certain fashion. So for the most part with HTML, we're doing encoding. When we get to CSS, it's more instruction based. So most of what we're going to do in CSS is going to seem like encoding because we're just telling it what colors to make things. But notice, hopefully you're starting to see some patterns coming up. And that's what we want to look for in programming and encoding. This is a problem solving thing. about solving a problem. We want to get some words and images on a page. That's a problem that this is our tool for solving. And problem solving is always unique. What we've done before might help us, but it might not. Each problem is a unique problem, so we kind of have to start again at every problem. So we need those patterns and basic tendencies. So for a problem solving example, think about basic math class. You go through math, you probably do a lot of math. I feel confident everybody in here could tell me what 1,317 times 183 is. Not off the top of your head, not as big as if I ask you what 3 times 5 is, but you could solve that other one because you know the steps for solving that problem, right? You don't know, you didn't memorize that number, you memorized the steps for solving it. Like walk over to the backpack, grab a calculator, and then I just made that up. Sorry, not my numbers I made up. So I'm gonna have to make up 2 more as I talk here. So like 1,837 times 245 equals. So grabbing the calculator up, 450,065. It's not one of a number that I memorized. I wasn't able to find that by memorizing what the product of those numbers was. I was able to memorize, to solve or find that by memorizing the steps to multiply the 2 numbers, which in our modern world is go grab the calculator. So I would like to point out that calculators are here to stay. If calculators were suddenly gone, the only thing that is going to matter is basic survival. So we won't really be needing them. We'll just be trying to eat and not freeze to death every day. So calculators are here to stay, so that's the steps for solving that. Or on paper, write it out in columns, whichever way you want to learn, in columns or break it up in groups and do the whole cross thing. They all result in the same number. And what you memorize is the steps to solve that problem, not the solution to the problem. Because every problem is a unique one and thus requires a unique solution. So hopefully you're seeing some patterns that will lead to the steps to solve the problem of getting words onto a web page here. But 2:14, I was aiming for 2:15 to take a break, so it's a good time to take a break. Does 10 minutes sound good to everybody?
Yes.
All right, so 2:15, we'll get back to it at 2:25. I need to go grab a drink, and I have some cough drops in my office right across the hall. I kept trying to cough there, so I will see you all at 2:25.